Yeah.
So, Senator Joe Manchin, how ready at this point is West Virginia, and what do you need?
We're not. And Mika, thanks for that. Let me tell you, we were talked, and I think the people of West Virginia were led into a false sense of safety and security by, for so long, we were the only state not reporting any cases. Well, if you're not testing, you're not going to report anything. When they were saying that we were the only state not to be having a case yet, we only tested 38 people. Can you believe that? Then we went up to 84. We got to 84, we found one. Now we're at 148. I will say that I spoke to Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, a couple nights ago, and told him our dire situation. We are the most at-risk state in the nation. If something hits, it is going to be a tsunami. And that's what I've been scared about and been preaching about for a long time. We need the test kits. We need to be in a tier 1 to where we're ready to defend ourselves, because an older population, a fragile population, basically hard workers with respiratory diseases, they're the ones that's going to be attacked first. And we're doing everything we can. In West Virginia, neighbors take care of neighbors. So reach out if you have an elderly neighbor or a family member, do their shopping, do everything, take the recommendations from the CDC. And the one person that you should be listening to is Dr. Anthony Fauci. If nobody else, listen to him. He will speak truth to power and tell you exactly what's happening.
Well, I saw a story last night, unfortunately, of a veteran in West Virginia. He and his wife, who exhibited signs of the coronavirus, got tested for the flu, got tested for other things, but not the coronavirus. And they've just been sent home and told there aren't any tests. That has to be really disturbing to you. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that. And also, you say West Virginia is the most at-risk state. Tell us why.
Well, our population, over 720,000 people, are elderly from the standpoint. We have 1,800,000, Joe. We have an older population, second or third, only to Florida. And with that being said, we have an awful lot of younger people than 60 years of age that have chronic illnesses, such as respiratory, because of the hard factory and mining work that they have done. These people have given everything they can, and they're patriots, true patriots. But right now, they're being defenseless. And if it hits, we don't have the ability. They're even closing hospitals. I said, there's no one should close a hospital during a pandemic. All this is going on. And we're talking about, Joe, everything in the world that we can possibly do. We need the federal government. You know, now I heard that either General Motors and Tesla says, hey, we can make ventilators. We can build ventilators if there's a shortage. I have also, Joe, a distillery in West Virginia, Smooth Ambler, says, hey, we're going to convert our distillery into making hand sanitizer. Mr. President, we need the leadership that brings this country together. We can do what South Korea and a lot more, and we're not doing it because no one's bringing us together. And rather than being denying, we're all in this together, and we've got to fight it. The other thing, Joe and Mika, you should be asking, what is Wall Street? Why are we allowing Wall Street to continue to do short selling? Why are we allowing them to do shorts right now, taking advantage of a declining 401k market and the misery that millions of people are going through, allowing people on Wall Street, these people who do short sales, to take advantage and make billions of dollars on the misery of America? Shouldn't they maybe close a day or two? We don't need, it's not an industry that we have to have, but right now to just fierce and calm the waters, if you will. And I think we need to be looking at everything. And I can tell you what we're doing. From Chuck Schumer was on earlier. I saw that, a good interview. But the bottom line, we've all talked about. The sad thing is, we're not talking to each other. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate aren't allowed to congregate, but we should be on conference calls together. We're not. We should be talking. If there's a difference, we know where the differences are. Right now, Joe, I don't think they should be sending you and Mika $1,000, nor me. I've said that. Our biggest thing is, how do we protect and make sure that we're protecting Social Security, people on welfare that need assistance, make sure that we're protecting them, but make sure that the money we have are going to the people that have been displaced, no fault of their own. But basically the market has collapsed. Their jobs have been shut down for the safety reasons. We should be able to carry them through. $1,000 check is not going to carry them through what's going to be, I think, a longer period of time. It's just a tough time.
Yeah, Senator. And Jonathan O'Meara, he's exactly right. We don't need the checks. the big corporations don't need the bailouts. It's working Americans that need that money. Jonathan Lemire has the next question for you, Senator.
Yeah, that's certainly right, Joe. And Senator, just on that idea, the Senate Majority Leader McConnell has said that he's keeping the Senate there until the third relief package is passed. So how confident are you that can come together quickly? And you just mentioned that part of it in terms of wanting that money to end up in the hands of Americans who need it rather than the wealthy or the big business. But what else do you think is essential to be in this what could be $1 trillion proposal?
Yeah, well, Jonathan, let me go back to last Thursday night when we were adjourned. Mitch McConnell adjourned the Senate. But it was ridiculous. Why are we leaving? The House is still there working on their package, okay? We could have stayed there and by Saturday morning had a package agreed on, which we just agreed on last night. So there's 5 days, almost a week that we've missed. It's ridiculous. Now, if there's a guilt complex, and now he wants us to stay, but don't stay and hurry it. This third package has to be done as well and targeted as well as we can possibly do to make sure we're not throwing money to the wind and caution to the wind. We've got to be thinking about future generations also. How long is this going to take? How about a small business that doesn't have capitalization to get through? What type of ways can we accelerate them getting capital? What can we do to offset? And basically, we don't have to be giving bailouts to corporate America. They had one heck of a bailout during the tax bill a year ago. Shouldn't we basically look into people that didn't benefit from this, that are really hurting and can't make it? And then the other people should have opportunity to have capital, but they should be paying it back, the large corporations. And the small companies need to work through the SBA, work through the proven programs. Unemployment compensation is where we should be working through. Break down the barriers, take away the waiting time, making sure if you're going to give them a bump in what they're able to receive from unemployment comp. Those are things, Jonathan, that we can do immediately. I don't know what the market, they're saying $250 billion for this segment, $250 billion for that segment. I don't know where they're getting these numbers from. I think we need to do what it takes, but we don't need to be wasteful in doing it and putting other people in harm's way.
Amen.
Senator Joe Manchin, always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being on this morning.
Well, stay safe and stay healthy, okay? That's the most important thing.
Same with you, Senator.
You too.
Thank you so much. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.